This week on the Walk On podcast. I think that's a problem, right? How you get elected is different than how you serve. The goal is not to just get elected, it is to serve.
This is not just an American issue, this is a global issue. We're seeing more heads of state, political actors, people with enormous amounts of power who are making everything personal to them. What's being missed is that they have a fiduciary and oath obligation to serving everyone, not just their group of friends, not just the people who voted for them, but they have to serve the entire community. And hopefully, the promise, and the great American experiment at least, is that if you do that, people will be better off and they'll continue to elect good people into public service.
Hello and welcome to the Walk On podcast. We are in season 5, if you can believe it. The Walk On podcast, if you're new here, is about people finding and following their passion. A couple of years ago, I was really trying to figure out what the rest of my career would look like. And that comes with lots of questions and curiosity. I read books, listened to podcasts, and that led to me interviewing people who are just really doing what they love and setting an example and changing the world. And so that's what we're doing today, continuing the conversation. We're thrilled to have Senator Jeremy Cooney from New York State. He is representing District 55. He is the chairman, Committee on Transportation. Those are the formal titles. He's got many more. He's got tons of accolades. Actually, he was just ranked number 14 on this year's City and State New York Albany Power 100. I know him as a fellow Hobart graduate. He's a friend. He's a champion for Rochester and New York, and just truly a policy leader, a passionate person who's committed about our communities. And so, Senator, welcome on.
Michael, thanks for having me and for a very generous introduction, and glad to be with you.
Well, thanks. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your family, your work, and then we'll dive into your career and the passionate work that you're doing now.
Well, that sounds great. Well, I am a member of the New York State Senate. There are 63 senators in New York State. I represent the greater Rochester region in that Senate. I have been a member of the Senate. This is not my third term, hard to believe.
Time flies.
Time flies when you're having fun, right? And I serve in the Senate majority. In that capacity, I serve as the chair of the Transportation Committee, as well as the chair of the Subcommittee on Cannabis. So transportation and cannabis don't necessarily seem like they fit together, but they are both very important areas of public policy that require the appropriate level of legislative oversight. And I'm very honored to have been asked by our majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, to serve in that capacity. But I serve on a number of committees, including the Finance Committee, the Insurance Committee, the Arts and Cultural Affairs Committee, and the Codes Committee, which deals with all of the public safety components of state law. So as a lawyer, as a public policy student, as a citizen of New York, it brings me great pleasure to represent my hometown, and hopefully we'll be able to keep doing that.
Yeah, well, we hope you will as well. You've done fantastic for the region. So talk to me a little bit about how did you get into politics? Where did this, because it is a sickness or a bug or a passion. My wife thinks it's a sickness, right? But where did that come from for you? Yeah, fair enough.
Well, look, I don't come from a family of politicians or lawyers. My mother was an English professor at Monroe Community College for 35 years. And so politics was not something that came naturally, if you will. That said, I've always had a sincere interest in community. And let me tell you what really informed that interest. I was adopted from an orphanage in Calcutta, India, and came to this great country at a very young age. I was adopted by a single mother, and my mother raised me in the city of Rochester, where I still live today, and went through public schools, Rochester City Schools. In fact, I'm the first Rochester City School District graduate to serve in the Senate in over 40 years. Feel very proud about that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But all of that I share because it really has given me an enormous amount of gratitude for being in this country, for being in New York. And when you're raised by a single parent, you are given a lot of love by that parent, but you're also given a lot of love by the community. And so whether that was my faith community, my church, whether that was my Boy Scout troop, whether those were teachers in my classroom, everyone really pitched in to help me get to where I am today. And so I've looked at my career and always tried to focus on giving back, to really reflect that gratitude that I carry with me today.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you mentioned the word community a couple times. And, I think politics gets such a bad rap. And it's, what's happening nationally, we hear about scandals, we hear about things being taken away. And I'm an elected official, as you know, at city council. And when I go to work every day and council activities, I'm thinking about the taxes that people are paying. I'm thinking about the services that people need to live their best life, to have, empowering on-ramps to success. And so community is at the center of that work. So how do you keep that, part and parcel in front of your mind when you're doing the legislative work that you're doing?
Sometimes I think we, and in those of us in politics and elected office, right, can forget that these aren't jobs. This is public service. And I'm not
Mhm.
just saying that as a kind of trite expression, but there really is a difference, right? Public service is always rooted in who you are serving, and that is the community.
Mhm.
And so the district I represent is a very unique district because it's pretty diverse in all senses of that word. It's rural, it's suburban, it's urban, it's aging, it's growing, it's ethnically diverse, it's linguistically diverse,
Mhm.
it's culturally diverse. And so that is the community, and those are the voices that I have the responsibility of advocating for at the state level. So when I say community focused or community driven, it's really those individuals, those neighbors that I am working for and serving on their behalf in the state senate. And I think that can get lost nowadays. And
Mhm.
I'm not pointing at one party or another or any specific elected official, but oftentimes it seems like you watch television or you see things on social media. It becomes about the politician themselves and not
Mhm.
about the people that they are elected to represent. And what I hope American electorates will continue to focus on is who are the people that are doing the work for others, not necessarily who are people who are looking to advance themselves and their own narrative. And I think the best example for your listeners and your viewers to consider is during the pandemic, which, by the way, I was elected in the middle of a pandemic. So it was a
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
interesting time to come into the state senate. But there is that expression that has really stayed with me, which is look for the helpers, right? Find the
Mhm.
helpers, right? So whether they are people during the pandemic who are helping hospitals and nurses and healthcare providers achieve what they were trying to do to keep us safe, or whether they were people in the community who are meeting the needs with food banks and cupboards or dropping off children's books, etc. Right? These were the people who were trying to make life better for our neighbors. I think we need elected officials and public servants who are helpers first and
Mm.
foremost before they are helping themselves.
I love that. Look for the helpers. And, as you think of where we are and not to get too far afield, but I think that's a problem, right? How you get elected is different than how you serve in the sense of you have to go raise money, you have to be visible. And so it is about you. And I think certainly at the congressional level and decisions that the Supreme Court made with money is speech, it makes that it forces that more, I think, than in many years. And so I think it is wise for people to remember that the goal is not to just get elected, it is to serve and bring those two back together.
Amen. I couldn't agree more. And look, this is not just an American issue. This is a global issue. We're seeing
Mhm.
more heads of state, political actors, people with enormous amounts of power who are making everything personal to them.
Yeah.
Right? And what's being missed is that they have a fiduciary and oath obligation to serving everyone, not just their
Mhm.
group of friends, not just the people who voted for them, but they have to serve the entire community. And hopefully, the
Yeah.
promise and the great American experiment, at least, is that if you do that, people will be better off and they'll continue to elect good people into public service,
Yeah.
right? And so That's what we have to maintain our commitment to, our fidelity to making sure that everyone sees that government is working for them at all different levels,
Yep.
whether that's picking up the trash on time, making sure the streets are plowed out correctly during the winter, and make at the state level, making sure people get their benefits and their health services and the roads are working. And at the federal
Yep.
level, making sure that the money is going to the appropriate organizations and groups and governments, right? So if we're all
Yep.
doing our job the right way, then people will feel that government is working better for them. And when government works better for them, it continues to make sure that this great American nation will continue to dominate the rest of the world.
Yeah, I love it. And we're going to pivot to some of the policy machinations from this session, but I think that's at the end of the day for me, the majority of Americans, the majority of people you represent. At the end of the day, yes, politics and what color jersey you wear is driving so much of it. But at the end of the day, we all have the same wants and needs, right? We want good schools, we want good roads, we want an on ramp to success, whatever that looks like for you. And if we can get past and have those kneecap to kneecap conversations, as I like to say, with people, much like this, about the issues and what they need and try to provide those services and deliver, I think the other stuff starts to melt away. And maybe I sound a little naive, but I really believe at the end of the day, as you're saying, when you serve people's needs and their life gets a little better, their life feels a little more valued and valuable, that resonates. And I think your numbers as an elected official have shown that by the numbers you've gotten at the ballot box show that people will put on a different jersey to pull for someone who's pulling for them.
Right.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's, since we went to the church of democracy there for a second, let's go to policy. And so, 2025 legislative session came to an end. Congratulations on finishing that and getting a breather. Although I know that's brief because the work continues. But what are most of the accomplishments that you're most proud of, or the pieces, one or two pieces of legislation that really resonate as something that you think was important this session that you drove or that the state accomplished?
Well, there's a number of things that I think that we can be proud of. And to your point, Michael, about how are you delivering? What specifically are you doing to improve people's lives? I think that is something that we took very seriously certainly in the state Senate, but really across state government. With all the different changing levers at the federal level, now is a time when the community who sends us to Albany for the first half of the year to make sure that we are coming home with something to report. And a couple of
Mhm.
things that I think stand out is how we are delivering for one of the most vulnerable populations in New York, and that is our children. Our children have a lot on their plates, a lot of
Mhm.
responsibilities in a very rapidly changing geopolitical world, between the political conflicts, between climate change, between shrinking resources, between aging populations. This is a generation, including your own son, who will have a
Yep.
lot more to deal with. And so, how are we as lawmakers in 2025 going to help them? And again, back to community, the community that I represent in Rochester, 50% of children in the city of Rochester live below the federal poverty line.
Yes.
And this is not a new thing. This has been going on since I was growing up in the city of Rochester. And
Yep.
so, two things that kind of jump out to me in the state legislative process that we delivered on, I'm really proud about. One is expanding the child tax credit. Now, we know this works because during the pandemic, the federal government expanded the child tax credit and you brought a lot of families out of poverty. But New
Mhm.
York has now taken the next step. So for children in New York State, if you are a child under the age of 4, your parent will be able to claim a $1,000 tax credit for you. If you are a child above the age of 4, then you get a $500 tax credit. Now, that may not seem like a lot of money, but for families who are making between $14,000 and $20,000,
Yep.
that is a world of difference. And
Yeah.
again, it's part of the piece of the puzzle on how we deal with generational poverty across our state. The other thing we did for children financially is something brand new, which is kind of a derivation of the baby bonds program that Senator Cory Booker started when he was Mayor Cory Booker in
Yeah.
the city of Newark, New Jersey. And this is an idea of kind of putting money aside for children who are in low income families so that when they turn 18, they have the ability to have some nest egg or some resources to go to college if that's their choice, buy a set of tools if they're joining the trades, buy a car if they have to get that car to go to work. They don't have generational wealth to draw upon. They don't have an aunt who has a savings account for them, So this would equip them. So we started that in New York, that children will receive $1,800. Now it's a one-time payment. Senator Booker, his policy proposal would be a payment every year up until age 18. I, of course, would love that. But with limited resources, we wanted to do something. So $1,800 for children who are born in New York State whose parents or guardian is currently receiving some sort of financial assistance, welfare benefit, etc. So it's a good way to kind of invest in kids and make sure that the parent has the resources from day one to be able to make sure that they can get to their doctor's appointment, make sure that their bellies are well fed, purchasing books so that they can start the literacy journey.
Yeah, I really appreciate that and that focus. And I actually just met with folks from the United Way this week where we talked about, the ALICE line, the asset limited income constrained employed line. So, if you have 50% of Rochester is at the poverty line, for instance, in Canandaigua, 9% is at the poverty line, but 49% are at that ALICE level, which is the working poor. These are folks that are one, car bill or one trip to the emergency room or a $3,000 ambulance bill away from homelessness or away from food insecurity. And so everything we can do to put tools, literally and figuratively, in their toolbox to have some stability is critical. And I think that, the number that you started at the beginning, which sort of what brought this up for me, is we're still considering the poverty line $14,000 to $20,000. It's a number that hasn't been adjusted in 50 years. And there are many people, that's where that ALICE number, as you know, is really impactful, because if we can get legislators and policymakers to start thinking beyond the poverty line and more into what does it take for a family of four to actually live in Ontario County, it's $103,000. That's the ALICE level right there. Wow. So a lot of people, $103,000 is a lot of income. And if you're not making that in Ontario County, you are paycheck to paycheck.
And I may be taking us off a little bit, of course, but I've been thinking a lot about this, is that there's a disconnect, I think, from a lot of people when you're talking about social welfare programs of people who don't work. But what we're seeing, especially in the Greater Rochester region, is we're seeing a lot of the working poor. So these are not people with physical disabilities who are unable to work, or these are people who may be working 2 or 3 jobs, but the wages in those jobs don't support or add up to that $103,000 mark that you just mentioned, Michael. So they may be working around the clock, but they're making minimum wage. Now, New York has raised its minimum wage, certainly well higher than the federal minimum wage level, but it's still not enough. And sometimes people are quick to blame the employers. And, that's really just not fair, because it's both, right? Both the worker and the employer, or the job, right, has to find ways to make the numbers work. And remember, a lot of these, fast food type jobs, I'll pick on Wendy's. You go work at Wendy's, you're not making much more than minimum wage. But was that job really designed to help build generational wealth? No, right? That job may work for a 16 or 17-year-old, or maybe even someone working part-time during college or something like that. But is that meant for someone to spend 20 years at and to get a pension and to take care of their family? No, it's not. So how do you upskill individuals and empower them to be able to get some of those jobs, many of which are going unfilled, to be able to earn $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 of income to better take care of their families? And that's a challenge that state lawmakers and local lawmakers are trying to figure out. And I'm sure it's not totally unique to New York. But again, I think in upstate New York, again, remembering our legacy of large employers like Kodak and Bosch and Lomb and Xerox, right? Those jobs are fewer and far between. So how do we create a pipeline of workers to go into those jobs so that people can move away from those low paying minimum wage jobs into more
Yep.
sustainable careers.
Yeah, 100%. We could spend a whole other podcast, talking about how do we empower people to have on-ramps to success. And there's, trades and education and all sorts of
Yes.
things, but
Yes.
it's obviously a complicated process. So glad that we've taken that step. Thanks for that update there. So on the back half of this interview, what are the most pressing issues facing the state that you want to work on next?
So I mentioned I'm the chair of transportation. And transportation is far more than just getting people from point A to point B. It's the affordability side of it. It's the convenience and time side of it. Michael, you used to live in Atlanta, and the traffic in Atlanta is horrific. It's probably only gotten worse, truthfully.
Yes.
Right. And our
Yes.
friends who live in places like New York City or Boston or Los Angeles, they know traffic, is part of their daily life. But with a strong public transit system, whether that's a subway in New York, whether that's an Amtrak train going from one part of the state to the next, whether that's a public bus system in a smaller community, right? All of those components help get people to where they need to go. And it's not just about getting to work or getting to school. It's about picking up your kid from childcare. It's about making sure you can get access to groceries and fresh fruits and vegetables. It's about making sure you can get to your healthcare appointment if you need one, right? And if you're spending 45 minutes on a bus to go 5 miles, right? That's ridiculous. And so we have to do work to increase the frequency and availability of the routes in public transit, especially in rural settings where you are, Michael, Canandaigua and Ontario County. We need to make sure that there's more public transit options. Now, we did in the last budget, I'm proud to say that we did an increase of about 5% to public transit systems. So systems like RTS in the Greater Rochester region, that's great. But if we had more funds going to public transportation, we could expand the reach. This is particularly the case for people with disabilities, the type of busing and vans that they need to be able to join our public transit system. But we'd also be able to have more frequency of the routes. And I think people miss that sometimes when they're thinking about one part of the state versus the next. Look, I represent transportation all across New York State. And when I go down to New York City and I miss a subway train, right? I tap my shoe on the platform just like everyone else's, but I may have to wait 6, 7, maybe 8 minutes before that next train comes. You miss the bus in upstate New York, you may be waiting 50 minutes. And by the way, you're not underground, you're outside. And it may be snowing outside, right? So the quality of life and the detrimental impact by not having a public transit system that works is monumental. The other thing that I think is a real opportunity for us to get serious about on the state level is high-speed rail. I talk a lot about high-speed rail, and I worked for a former member of Congress who believed in high-speed rail at a time when that technology was just coming into effect in Japan with the bullet train. But we've come a long way where we've seen European nations, we see Southeast Asian populations getting used to faster and faster trains. But yet Amtrak in our neck of the woods, Michael, is rally around between 65 and 70 miles per hour, right? Well, you've got trains who are going 200 miles per hour in other parts of the world. Now, just imagine if we were able to get that miles per hour up and be able to move people from one part of the state here in Western New York and Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse all the way down to New York City in a much faster way and connect hubs like Toronto, just west of us here, which is the largest economic center of Canada, to one of the largest economic centers in the country, in the United States, which is New York City, the largest city in the country, right? That would move and open up our state from a housing perspective, from a job perspective, from an education perspective in ways that we haven't even imagined to dream about. So the technology is there, Michael. I want to make sure that we bring it across New York. And I truly believe that in 2025, investing in high-speed rail, which, by the way, other states across the country are doing, Florida, Nevada, California, California, right? They're already doing it. So if we just do that in New York, we will create what I call the 21st century Erie Canal effect, right? Just like the Erie Canal changed the game for cities like Buffalo and Rochester and Syracuse and Albany, it will change the game again with high-speed rail.
Oh, I appreciate it. And I'm a huge advocate. Just by way of example, for me, I went back to school last year, went to Brown University. Instead of driving the throughway, 6 hours up to the Mass Turnpike, it would have been amazing to take a high-speed rail into Albany or to New York, right? Hop up to Providence, and it would have been great. Wasn't an option, right? It was a 2-day trek to be able to do that. And that cuts off tourism. It cuts off business. And as we're thinking of this high-tech corridor that may come to fruition from Syracuse to Buffalo, moving workers, right? It would be great if you're a worker and you could live, I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but you live in Buffalo because that's where your family is, but you have high skilled jobs, or we've retrained you, and you can take a 45-minute train and get over to Syracuse to go to work at Micron. Game changing, right? So I'm with you and think it's amazing. How do we get there quicker, right? That's one of the things, and not to get into the politics of things, but from the election, a lot of people, Joe Biden made this massive investment, Congress made this massive investment, but people didn't feel it. So how do we make this happen faster? Obviously with your leadership and the great place you have as the chair of that committee, but how do we move, tire or wheels on tracks quicker?
Yeah, I agree with that. And, those of us who have read that Ezra Klein book, The Abundance, right,
Yeah.
know firsthand
Yep.
that that is a generational divide in American policy, right? That there's this sense of urgency in a younger electorate that didn't exist maybe 10, 15 years ago, where the
Yep.
idea is, not just what are you doing for me now, but how are you demonstrating that you are moving the ball forward per se? And so I'll use high-speed rail as an example. We put 500,000 in this year's state budget to look at the New York State Thruway corridor as a potential pathway for that high-speed rail. Now, why the Thruway corridor? Well, this is what other states have done similarly. They're using the interstate system, which already has land control. So you're not having to deal with property rights of a neighbor or of a municipality, right? You already
Yep.
have control of the land of which the New York State Thruway, the I-90 corridor, is already going. But now with the different train technologies, we don't need as much room as we needed before, right?
Yep.
These tracks are narrower. They're using different types of magnetic technology to move trains along faster, to curve better, right? Are there ways that we can build a track down the median of the New York State Thruway or along on either of the sides, right? Is that possible? And that's a way to kind of move this conversation forward. But let me tell you the most interesting way. If you remember from Abundance, one of the reasons why the California high-speed rail program is held up as one of the most challenging public works projects in the country is that the government is trying to do it alone. What I think New
Yep.
York can do differently is we can do this as a public-private partnership, meaning taxpayers in New York State aren't going to have to pay to build this thing, right? There are private companies like Brightline and others who are actually finding profitability in this type of modality of transportation, meaning they'll come in and build out the infrastructure and operate this thing efficiently to have high-speed rail amenities that New Yorkers are going to want. You want to be on a beautiful train that gets you from point A to point B safely, that has, all the accoutrements that you think about when you're traveling by train. But New York State government can't afford to do that. But if we allow
Yep.
them to do that, what's their incentive? Well, we've given you the road. We've given you the way, the land access, the right of way access, right? So that's our value as a state government
Yep.
contributing to that. Their value is actually building out and operationalizing this. And by the way, they're going to pay us to operate this, right? So this is a win-win. New Yorkers get access to a transportation amenity and modality, and we don't have to pay for the whole darn thing. So this is the way that we show value, is not like, hey, let's build out a track infrastructure that will take 20 years. No, let's look at whether we can actually take control of this land and have a pathway for a train. And if so, let's sell those land rights to a private company to do that. But make sure that there is still an affordability option so that all New Yorkers can benefit.
I love it. Well, we're wrapping up here. Clearly, you have a passion for this role. Clearly, you have a passion for the work. I wish more people, and hopefully they'll see that from here, that politicians actually do love this work. They care about this. They're trying to solve problems for communities, you said. So I'd love to leave it here. What advice do you have for others that are looking to find their passion and purpose?
So passion and purpose has to come from your heart. And so whether that is medicine, when my wife is a healthcare provider and she loves helping her patients and being available to her patients, and it takes a lot of passion to do healthcare in America in 2025, but it has to
Sure
be driven
does.
from your heart. She does not have a heart for politics, and that's okay, right? She
Yeah.
supports me in my journey and what I do, but her passion is healthcare. My passion is making sure that there's good, safe public transit, like we talked about. So you have to listen to yourself and find out what you're doing. Also, by the way, passion and purpose doesn't have to be your job, right? You can have a
Mhm.
job that is meaningful and allow you to provide for your family, but you have a passion and purpose that allows you to do all of those extracurriculars, as we say, right?
Yeah.
Serving on boards, volunteering your time, reading to children in a school setting, volunteering in a hospital. All of these things can be driven by that heartfelt passion and purpose, but it doesn't have to pay your bills too. So if you can find both like I did, public policy and being an elected representative, great. But if you're in a job that you like, you have got great coworkers and it pays the bills, but you want to follow that passion and purpose and give back so you have that meaningful experience in your life, then find that too.
Well, I love it. And it always welcome a reminder to civic engagement. So I appreciate that. Senator, how can people find out more about you?
Well, you can go to our website. It's just jeremycooney.com, or you can Google me and it will pop up. We also have a governmental website, which has all of our programs and bills, and that's ROC Senator, ROC for Rochester, of course, rocsenator.com. So you can find us online. Follow us on social media at Senator Cooney, Cooney, and come along on the journey. If you have something you want to contribute or an idea you want to share, we're always welcome to hear those.
Awesome. Well, this has been a treat, Senator. We appreciate you being on. Senator Jeremy Cooney, chairman of the Committee on Transportation. This is Walk On Podcast, people leading with passion and purpose, providing a roadmap for your personal journey. Hear their stories, find your passion, walk on. Senator, again, thanks for being on.
Thanks, Michael.
Next up on the Walk On Podcast. We want our children to learn. We want our children to gain skills. And you can't just throw someone in a classroom. You have to know how to teach. So how do you bring that to life with the students that you're working with?
You're right. We really do, as a society, need to rethink the way that we value teachers. And we need to understand that entrusting our kids with teachers who really, when they're in school, they're spending more time with teachers than they are with us. What is the function of schools? What is the value of schools? What do we want schools to do? Do we believe, as John Dewey said, that schools are the engines of democracy? Like, are schools really preparing civically engaged people who are going to keep the world running? Then, that's a tremendous responsibility.
I don't know what I'm trying to prove by getting you. It was only a matter of time.